Welcome back, everyone. Can you believe we're at the middle, or just about the middle, of EDPS 502, a very quick tour through educational psychology, which makes it kind of apropos that our unit this week is called Social and Moral Development, a Very Quick Tour. This is one of those units where you look and say, we could take a year or two or three in this module. I guess probably most of them are that way, but this one I think makes me feel even more compressed than some of the other units. This takes a look at some of the models that look at the question, how do we develop our social and moral senses? What are the things that influence the ways we develop as social, moral, ethical human beings? And to do that, we are going to take a flyby tour of several key models. Let's take a look here. Oh, come on. There we go. Here's Abraham Maslow. Maslow's classic hierarchy of need is often presented as a triangle, looking to say we must have our most basic needs, that is to say, our needs for things like food and shelter and ultimately attachment and other kinds of things. We must have those met before we can go on and be successful in other kinds of more complex endeavors. And to think about why we do the things we do is to think about which needs are being met, which things are needed at a particular time in our life history. So we'll talk very quickly about Maslow. We will also talk about Erik Erikson, who looks at stages of psychosocial development as a series of dilemmas or conflicts that happen to us throughout our life. And if we get stuck in one of those stages, it will influence the way that we carry on, regardless of the way our age, our chronological age, increases. And so we'll talk very briefly about Erikson. We'll look at Lawrence Kohlberg, who was influenced by Erikson, but was in particular interested in moral and ethical decision-making. How we decide what's good, what's right, what's ethical. And he has a series of steps that here are a triangle, but aren't always presented that way. From doing what we do to avoid getting punished, all the way up to doing what we do based on some kind of ethical principle, some kind of broad-based rule for what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is true. Interestingly, Kohlberg, when developing this model, did a series of interviews with individuals based on particular ethical dilemmas and looked at the way people developed in their thinking. However, all of the people in his sample were males. Well, any of you who've taken a research class will go, whoa, wait a minute, what's wrong with this picture? Can we infer that because males do things that females will always do them in the same way? Which is exactly what Carol Gilligan asked. And Gilligan's is the most current, most recent is a better word, of the theories. And Gilligan said, but what about women? And her theory suggests that women may have a different progression in looking at what constitutes ethical or correct or good behavior. She calls her stance of women an ethic of care, and suggests that rather than being as principle-driven and rule-driven as the Kohlberg model is, that her model suggests women are more relationship and care-driven. Read them and see what you think. Oh, that's the end. Let's take a look at the module for this week. We have, of course, the video introduction, the readings. There's a really interesting TED Talk on the effects of early neglect. We're going to find out what happens to children when they don't get the things they need when they're young, what happens to them developmentally. And it's really interesting to think of that in terms of the models that we're looking here. Think about what would Erikson say about this, what would Maslow say about it, and so forth. There's a real life example of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that you might be interested in. And then there are short videos that are, you might think about crash courses in Kohlberg's theory and Gilligan's theory. It's interesting when we're thinking about moral and ethical development to think, well, how does this play out in my own belief system? Which of these models resonates with me? And that's the kind of thinking that you're going to be asked to do for your reflection this week. For your critical analysis paper, this week you are to turn in the topic and references to the degree that you have them. I know you won't have every single reference right now, but I want to make sure that you're heading off into the right direction with the right kinds of references. So don't get into a panic when you see reflection paper. It's simply, or analysis paper, excuse me, the topic and the references that you need to do this week. And we'll have one more conference. And for now, I will sign off and talk to you next week. Bye.